Okay, let's dive into this explainer. When you think of the ultimate mountaineering challenge, your mind probably goes straight to Mount Everest, right? It's the highest peak, the grandest ambition. But today, we're going to shatter that illusion. We're looking at a mountain that makes Everest look almost welcoming. Welcome to K2, deeply nestled on the border of Pakistan and China in the Karakoram Range. Standing at an imposing 9,607 meters, according to our source data, its name simply means Karakoram 2. But history? History knows it by much darker names. The Mountain of Deaths, the Wild Mountain, the Savage Mountain.
And the math behind those names is absolutely chilling. Compare a relatively standard survival rate to K2's terrifying 25% mortality rate. To put that into perspective, Everest has a mortality rate of about 5%. K2's is 25. That means, mathematically speaking, for every 4 climbers who reach the summit, 1 doesn't return. If 20 people go up, it's highly uncertain if 5 of them will ever come back down. Because of this grim reality, K2 isn't climbed for commercial greed or mainstream fame. The people who go there are driven by darker motivations, fear, and a bizarre relationship with pure bad luck.
What's truly terrifying is the physiological reality of the mountain itself. You've probably heard of the death zone. This starts at altitudes above 8,000 meters. Up here, oxygen deprivation is so extreme that the human body literally begins consuming itself. Every single breath you take is just a countdown. And on K2, this zone is far wider and much less forgiving than on Everest. You're dealing with 150 km/h winds. There are no easy commercial routes. Every angle of this mountain is seemingly determined to kill you, dealing out death without any warning whatsoever.
1986, the Italian disaster. The mountain writes its own rules.
In the middle of the summer season of 1986, multiple groups were trying to summit. They were banking on standard weather forecasts. But the thing is, K2 doesn't do standard warnings. The weather abruptly and violently shifted, trapping climbers from all over the world in a relentless, unpredictable nightmare. 13. That is the exact number of lives K2 claimed during that single season. 13 people, engineers, farmers, men and women from Britain, Poland, and Italy, whose names were tragically reduced to victims of the mountain.
The crucial point here is how these tragedies unfolded on an intensely personal level. Take the haunting story of British climber Julie Tullis and Liliane Bailey. They were trapped on their descent right in the middle of the death zone. Exhausted and completely starved of oxygen, Lillian's body simply failed her. She sat down in the snow, her body no longer responding, and just waited for death. And Julie, trapped in that freezing, oxygen-starved air beside her, she could do absolutely nothing but sit there and watch her friend fade away.
When you compare these grim fates, the sheer variety of K2's cruelty really becomes apparent. First, we have Italian climber Sergio Martini. He suffered a fatal heart attack right near the summit. His body froze exactly where he fell. Years later, airplanes passing overhead could still see his frozen silhouette. Then, we have Polish climber Wojciech Wróż. He successfully summited, but on the way down, he simply stopped moving at 8,500 meters. Whether paralyzed by exhaustion or a neurological breakdown, he froze like a statue, abandoned at the highest reaches of the world, while other climbers desperately scrambled to save themselves.
This brings us to a haunting quote from the global press at the time. What for? Are we really going there to die? It's a heavy existential question that gripped the world after the '86 disaster. Were these climbers consciously marching to their own executions? Some climbers actually answered yes, saying they simply couldn't do anything else. Others searched for a better answer, and honestly, they found nothing. 1995, the solitary climber, Alison Hargreaves, and the ultimate risk. Alison Hargreaves was this uncompromising, incredibly strong Scottish climber who had already conquered Everest. But for K2, she wanted to push the boundaries of ambition, or maybe madness, even further. She sought the ultimate risk, which is solo climbing. It's the absolute most dangerous form of mountaineering. You have no partner. You have no support team. If a single mistake is made, if anything goes wrong, there is an absolute certainty of death. You are completely on your own. Alison embraced this solitary hubris, taking on the hardest route K2 had to offer, blindly trusting herself to nature.
The devastating outcome happened when a beautiful day completely turned to hell. Alison actually reached the summit alone, but on her descent, K2's true nature revealed itself. She was swept away by a sudden avalanche. Her body was left in a permanently unreachable void, high up on the mountain. Her death really shook the mountaineering world because she represented the purest yet most lethal form of the sport, completely surrendering yourself to the absolute limits of nature.
2008, The Bottleneck Tragedy, K2's Bloodiest Summer.
This era wasn't just about the weather. It was about the dangerous ambition of dozens of climbers, creating a localized, chaotic nightmare at the worst possible place. 11 lives lost in a single cascading failure of human planning during one summer. The sheer scale of this tragedy makes it one of the absolute darkest moments in mountaineering history.
Let's walk through exactly how this systemic collapse happened, step by step. Step 1. A massive traffic jam formed on the narrow descent paths. You had hundreds of climbers trying to share this tiny route. Step 2. Because of the delays, oxygen depleted rapidly, leading to severe exhaustion. Step 3 was the trigger. A serric ice wall avalanche collapsed, literally destroying the only route down. And finally, Step 4, lethal disorientation and total darkness. Climbers couldn't find their tents, wandering in the freezing pitch black until they simply perished.
Amidst all this nightmare, there were moments of profound, tragic heroism. Irish climber Gerard MacDonald found himself facing a brutal choice. Down in the chaos, he chose to carry the weight of another struggling climber over his own survival. Now, in the death zone, using your rapidly depleting oxygen to help someone else means you burn out incredibly fast. Gerard vanished into the mountain forever, sacrificing his life in a desperate bid to save another.
Looking at the diverse casualties of this chaos really shows how K2 destroys both bodies and minds. We have Seven Altan, a Turkish-German climber who vanished on the descent. Jumik Bote, a Nepalese Sherpa who fell while trying to save a friend. And then there's Marco Confortola. He was an Italian survivor who physically made it off the mountain, but was so psychologically shattered by the trauma that he tragically took his own life 4 years later. K2's toll doesn't stop at base camp.
The human cost of ambition. Why do we throw ourselves at death?
Moving from the historical timeline to a more philosophical reflection on these recurring nightmares, this comparison is incredibly revealing. Consider Reinhold Messner. He's the world's most experienced climber, and he survived K2 because he knew his limits. He survived by knowing exactly when to retreat and surrender to nature. Now contrast that with Pemba Dorje in 2004. He survived his climb, but he did so by abandoning a dying climber on his descent. The guilt and the psychic toll were immense, and he died years later in a motorcycle accident, carrying a fractured soul. Some say K2 eventually claimed him too. It eats the spirit just as much as it eats the body.
Consider this historical mystery from 1953. Art Gilkey, a sick climber, falls to his death. But the lingering question remains, was it a tragic accident or a conscious sacrifice to save his friends? You see, on a mountain like K2, death sometimes looks like a mercy. It might have been a dark, conscious choice on his part to quickly end his own suffering rather than drag his whole team down with him.
So what is actually killing these climbers? Well, it's an obsession with success and this thing called summit fever. It's a blatant disrespect for nature's warnings. It's a form of controlled aggression and psychological breakdown. Something that some people even describe as a subconscious desire for death, a weariness of life disguised as extreme sport.
Which leads us to this brutally honest quote. When asked why they faced death at 8,500 meters, a common response is, because it was there, to prove I wouldn't run away in fear. It's a raw test of self-control. And while most of us will never even attempt to climb K2, it forces us to question just how far we're willing to push our own limits. It's a deeply personal search for truth that is as terrifying as it is awe-inspiring.
And this brings us to one final stark question. What is the true price of a human life for a summit? The mountain remembers every name, every story, and every soul it has ever claimed. But for us, the living, we have to ask ourselves, how much is a person willing to pay for that peak? The answer, time and time again, is written in tragedy. Thank you for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning and stay curious.